This is my daughter's Camaro, but sometimes I get to drive it. It's a beauty. I sure like the way it's built. Lowest, widest stance car at its price. It hugs the road like a big car, yet responds like a sports car. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a car more. And that 140 horsepower Standard 6, biggest in any car at its price, really performs. Camaro looks so different, too. It's not just a new model. It's a new car.
The Supersport Phoenix Zone Office car was delivered on June 16th of 1966 from Fisher Body as Coach DD56LA. Although partially assembled at Norwood and shipped via rail to Van Nuys for final assembly, it was the 52nd build of the engineering study. By late 1964, Chevrolet was designing their answer to the infamous Ford Mustang. This process began with the XP836 design study that would produce scale models that didn't run out of artistic materials such as clay.
Two-dimensional drawings must be translated into three-dimensional clay models. In the case of the XP836, it is decided to go to a full-size clay mock-up.
Balsa wood.
While this is going on, mock-ups of parts and components are fitted into a wooden framework of the F-car.
Fiberglass.
Full-scale fiberglass model. It won't run, but it looks enough like the real thing to fool an expert.
When this process was complete in the winter of 1965, the potential drivetrains were tested in Chevy 2 X-Car Novas. At the same time, Fisher Body was creating sheet metal tooling that would utilize sheet metal modeling techniques for the coaches that they would supply to Chevrolet. When these processes were refined and readied for test manufacture, the program was tasked with the hand building of the first working prototypes.
Prototypes that do run are next on the schedule. Time for the showdown.
This process would ultimately create 49 working prototypes for the F-Car manufacturing platform, the first Chevrolet Camaros. These cars would be a landmark achievement and spark the longest and fiercest rivalry to ever come out of Detroit, the Ford Mustang versus the Chevrolet Camaro.
Camaro, the new car that's something else, something you've never seen before in a driving machine.
One of 4 on Fleet and Special Order number 5-12, made by Phoenix Sales Zone Office. It carried model number 12637. The partial assembly of knockdown kit DD56LA by Norwood and a subsequent shipment to Van Nuys explains and showcases the inefficiencies of General Motors shipping records during the mid-1960s. Based upon the research of Pilot Car Registry, this fully loaded turquoise Supersport was utilized by Zone Office employees to promote the new product line. After approximately 6 months of demonstrator and promotional use, it was sold to its first owner in the spring of 1967. It was sold by participating dealer Jerry Lane Chevrolet of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. L100003, or infamously known as LA3 by Pilot Car Registry, is one of our favorite memories. Not only is it the only Los Angeles car known to exist as of December 2018, it is the only one-owner story we have ever documented with a pilot prototype. In addition to being one of the single most interesting stories we've ever had with Authentication, it was also the start of a long-lasting friendship. Our team's logistics expert, Miss Jamie Schwartz, received an ownership hit on law enforcement databases in the summer of 2014. It would be almost a year before our team found ourselves within driving distance of Mississippi, and our research had not gleaned a working telephone number. Suffice it to say, a year later we found ourselves standing on a sidewalk in front of an original Queen Anne home, just a stone's throw away from the Gulf of Mexico. Armed with original documentation for a car that we didn't even own or even knew existed, standing on that sidewalk that led to that massive Victorian screen door was the equivalent of the Beast from the children's movie The Sandlot. With his jowls bared and dripping slobber, through the deep-throated growling and barking, there would come a voice at the door. "Buckwheat! Damn it! We have company! Play nice!" True story, all the way down to the massive chain attached under the wraparound porch. The daunting specimen of dog flesh that stood before us, his growling turned to whimpers when you rubbed his ears, and his owner was just as cordial. Bill invited us into the grandeur of a time long past, an original Victorian home that used to be his grandmother's. It was lacking in the touch of a female, but it was obvious that his family had been in his home for well over 100 years. We explained the reason for our unannounced visit, and his eyes began to water. I asked if he still owned that car, and the answer spilled from the memories of his life like lemonade on a hot summer's day. Bill had been in the 8th grade during the spring of 1967, a date that had been shown in our research to be a reoccurring theme, and his father had taken him and his sister to the local Chevrolet dealership. His sister was a sophomore, so she would need a car for transportation. After much debate about the practicality of four-door sedans, the two children had convinced him to purchase Chevrolet's newest sporty coupe. That car was LA number 3. She drove him to school in it every day, took him to ball games, ice cream stands, and a vast amount of other places. And the two of them were, and still are, very close. He always considered it his car, all the way down to the original dealership emblem that he removed from the deck lid and promptly re-adhered to the door of his bedroom as a youngster. It's still on that door, by the way. Long story short, that car was bought that fateful day 50 years ago. It had become his daily driver when his sister went away to college. He had the car when he graduated, got married, started his career, had kids, and finally retired. That made ownership history pretty easy for us. So it was time to see the car. It didn't run. He'd been meaning to restore it, but life had a way of always getting in the way. We jumped into his truck, and he drove the team to meet his son, and number 3, just a few blocks away. When we arrived and the formalities of meeting his pride and joy were accomplished, we walked around the back side of the house, and there, stored in front of me, was one of the most complete pilot prototypes we had ever witnessed. This car had never been apart, so there was nothing to lose, replace, or discard. It was in need of a considerable amount of attention to be roadworthy again, but we were enthralled by the completeness of the example. All the prototype parts, prototype sheet metal, and bulletproof provenance was there. Our archive records had shown that the testing of the IBM 360 computer hadn't taken place in Los Angeles, thus eliminating the forced input cal tags. These same records show that the partially assembled pilot prototype had been hand-built last, utilizing Fisher Body Kit DD56LA at Norwood, before being shipped via rail with number 1 and number 2 to California for final assembly testing procedures. The same paperwork showed it being the first kit allocated to the Van Nuys program. So I was curious, and lo and behold, under the hood, in the unmolested engine bay, was the cal tag represented in our paperwork. So to this day, LA number 3 stands as the only Los Angeles car to exist. It's been owned by the same young enthusiast for 50 years. He always thought it was cool, and maybe something significant, but now he knows. And as for us, we now have a story to match his.